Thanks. Thank you for having me. My slides are visible. In my talk about designing systems, it's actually about design systems. It just sounds fancy and edgier if it's a designing systems. And the other talk that is parallel to me is about boredom. So I hope we won't practice this here too much. So just switch if you feel bored. This is the cool sentence I have on my website to attract new clients. But basically, I'm something between a designer and a coder. You could also say I'm a pretty bad coder and a pretty bad designer, so I do both, so it doesn't show too much. And as she said, I have a color fetish, and I maintain, I believe, what is the largest open source color name list. And I thought I never had an occasion to advertise this to so many people, so I do. Before you ask, my favorite color is called testosterone. So my talk will be about design systems, the evolution of design systems, where we are now, what design tokens are, and their taxonomy, and how we can use them for parametric design. So before we do that, we need to make a few steps back and talk about standards. They're omnipresent. I think they establish themselves whenever something is practical, it becomes a standard, basically. So, and it's the foundation for everything else I will talk about today. So I think one of what should be obvious standards is like where the hot and the cold water is. But there's still lots of people getting that wrong, so I burn myself in cheap hotels. But I think it has established itself that on the left is the red side, and on the right the blue. And I'm not sure if this is in some kind of plumber's manual, but that's how it should be. We're getting closer to home now. Bosch has their drill heads standardized, so they figured, oh, we don't need all the sizes from 1 to 1,000, so they just came up with steps that make sense. And since then, everyone makes these dowels that use the same numbers, and whenever you drill when you drill a hole that has an 8, you can be pretty sure that the dowel with an 8 will fit in that hole. So, and now even closer to home, we are coming to typesetting or typography in general, where we used to put these little metal blocks in wooden frames to print papers and whatnot. And we still use some language that originated from that today. So the height of one of these blocks is 1m. It refers to the block size. And this technology is not around anymore, but we still use its language. So I think it's a standard that established a design language that was so strong that we are still using it. And we had these fonts in drawers, and in the upper part of the drawer, we had all the capital letters and the smaller letters in the lower part. And I think you know what I'm getting at. It's the uppercase and the lowercase. We still use that. I had no idea that it was because it was in a drawer at some point. So we solved a few things, right? Inconsistency, just we got used to things that were practical and established them. We tried to avoid duplication or like near duplication, and uncontrolled growth. We try to standardize things so we don't have any syncs with tree things, or I have seen that as well, but yeah. But specifically to design, we started to do handbooks. And I think there are lots of classical examples that I like a lot. I think one of the most famous one is the one from NASA that goes into great length to detail how to use their logo and whatnot, how much space you need to put around them. And my other favorite one is the one from the New York Transit Authority, where they explain exactly how they came up with all the iconography. So back then, they needed still to paint them by hand, so it was kind of a handbook for the people who painted these. But also, if you would be the next designer that would come, you would have quite a good insight of like how you're supposed to build these new icons, because they went in great length to explain how they actually work. And they're still used today by Netflix and Alienware to explain what you're supposed to do or not with their brand. And I think almost every famous brand has one of these. So I think with that, we now have like documentation and tools for learning, but they were pretty one-dimensional. I mean, there were books. You could go back and forth, and maybe you had a chapter, and that was it, right? But we went into an age where we have interaction, where we needed like to show states, complexity, structure, and we gave away a bit of creative freedom, right? Because the people that wrote these books were very keen on you following these rules. I mean, you couldn't go and say, oh, I want a green NASA logo and I want to have it upside down. So that's why they wrote this book in the first place, right? And then came the interactive style guides, and I think that's still where we are now. But the first I noticed that was publicly available was back then when I was working at one of the sponsors, Unique. In 2010, it was the Lonely Planet style guide. I still remember that day vividly. I was like, wow, look what they did. They have all the variables on a page, and all the colors are there. It was awesome. And since then, it definitely has become a trend. Like you can see on styleguide.io, they're like, I think every major brand has an online style guide now. And the first one I actually built myself was back when I was working at Hinderling Volkart. Good luck saying this in English. We built the website for Swiss, where I was quite involved, and we used something called Middleman, that was like a static site generator to build a storybook, basically, where we showed the components and when also tried to visualize as good as we could the colors we were using. But as you can see, oops, sorry, my slides. So we had solved structure and interaction and state, but not really complexity. And as I saw on the Swiss website, we had the variable for the brand called red, red one, or I don't remember. But now as soon as you need to do some iteration on that and the brand becomes purple, for example, or they have a sub-brand, what happens quite often in big companies, you start to get a problem. You need to re-engineer your code, right? And I think, and I don't want to blame anyone, but I think this shows in lots of style guides where sometimes it's like somehow semantical, but then also not at all, where they just enumerate numbers. This is the primer style guide from GitHub that I actually like quite a lot. It's very well done. It's super nicely written and documented. But I think there are some fundamental issues with the language. For example, they have these spaces called 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They don't really give guidance of how to use them, where they're used, and how they came up with it. Or no, I think they did say how they come up with it. It's a base 8 scale, yeah. And there are probably tons of other reasons for that, not only the style guide, but it kind of show if you go to CSS stats and then put it in, they have tons of different colors and background colors and font sizes, etc. So they have quite a lot of styles still, even though they have a style guide, right? And it should be pretty clear that there's only like a fixed amount of colors and fonts you're supposed to use. And I think this is the same I noticed with the Swiss website or lots of other websites I have worked on. And the reason I wanted to show the Swiss website, for some reason the CSS stats wouldn't work on it, so I just chose to blame someone else's code rather than mine. I'm sorry, GitHub people. But it shows here in the Rizzo style guide as an example, they're using the same color 3 times, but there's no explanation given if like one color changes, how does it impact the two other colors? Am I supposed to change these as well? Or how am I supposed to work with that? Or there's other examples how this could go wrong in the Salesforce style guide that I also like a lot, don't get me wrong, but they have so many color tokens that I think it's very hard, it's very hard to consume, and you really have to study them to understand them. So it gets hard to understand, but it gets also hard to implement. And you have the other extreme example on Airbnb, for example, where you just have like these 5 colors with almost no context. It looks super minimal and super nice, but it raises lots of questions, at least if you want to continue to work on it or implement it. And I think another reason is that we are still working with unopinionated tools. We start with an empty page where we can do whatever we want. In the first Photoshop version I have ever used, that was version 4.5, I think the color picker looked almost exactly like that. So it doesn't give you any guidance on what could be a good color for colors you have already picked, or what could be a color that has a nice contrast to another color you have already picked. It basically always lets you select whatever color there is. But at least they start to show you, oh, this has a sufficient contrast on this other color, you put it on. So there's definitely an effort going on, but I think we're not there yet. And it's even worse with fonts. Whenever you want to place a font, you can do whatever you want. Every time you click somewhere to place fonts, feel free, do what you want. So it doesn't really help you to be focused and to understand your own design. It just lets you do what you want to do. And I think it has a lot to do with how we used to work. I've worked in several agencies here in Zurich, and it was always about the same. We would do some visual design, and then at the end of the visual design, we quickly need to reverse engineer our own design, look at all the pages, measure all the spaces, and in the end, we would just make this huge document and say, look, this is my design, now do it, front end. And we just had basically a bunch of lists that they had measured after the fact, right? So I think, also what I wanted to point out is that quite often you would find inconsistencies when developing it, and then you need to go back to the designers, and then maybe you wouldn't update the style guide because the deadline is probably passed already, so you need to quickly do it, and then you just forget about it, because in most agencies you just do the project, give it to the client, and then you run off to the next project. And I don't mean this in a bad way, but it's just how it is. So I think we have established, or at least I have established for myself, that a style guide is mostly a documentation. It's often no real help to extend the design, and it often also fails to explain the design principles. Like we saw in these old books, they would go in great lengths and say, look, this is how I did my icons with these measurements and have a golden ratio or whatever. It's almost like we forgot about this and just started to document what we did after the fact, just by measuring it, not by explaining it. And I think it can also be harmful. It can give you the illusion of order, almost. You can, as a product owner, you can say, oh, we have this style guide. Whatever we do from now on will be clean, and it will be really quick to do because we have this style guide. I have heard this quite a lot, actually. So I came up with this concept that I call taxonomy. It's actually design taxonomy. It's just a fancy way of saying finding words for things. And it builds on top of all that we said. So it doesn't replace anything. It's just complementary. So it's the science of naming and classifying things. It comes from natural sciences where, let's say, a scientist would find a new insect and he would make up a name that would express how many, for example, legs an insect had, if it has a hard shell or not. So, and if I would know anything about these names. I could hear a name and know, oh, this is an insect with a hard shell and this many legs. So it's quite practical. And it creates like a common understanding for the entirety of your system. Even though you don't know the specifics of every insect, you know, oh, there are that many that have so many legs, and there are that many that have so many legs. So just by naming, you are getting a good grasp of the categories and the semantics of your systems. And I think what we saw before in all these style guides were mostly what I call value tokens. I chose to call them that because I'm a developer and a value is a value, but I think you get the thing, right? I think Lukas Oppermann in his talk calls them decision tokens for some reason, but I go with value tokens. And it's basically saying, oh, Sonic Blue is this hex color, size cat is 16 pixels, and my tiles are Georgia 20 pixel and bold. That's it. And now you would give it to the developer to, I don't know, design your article. You have laid it out in Figma or something, and I would implement it like you wrote it in your style guide. I would go and say, oh, there's a small space there, a large space there, a small space there, a large space there. And you would probably use Tailwind or write it in the CSS directly, right? And then would come a nice design iteration. Like it happens a lot now because we don't give the projects to the clients anymore. We try to maintain them over the years. And what happened, and that's in fact the thing I was hired most for in the last 5 years, is like rewriting someone else's CSS and going and saying, oh, this is not small anymore, this is now large, etc., etc. So you have to go to all the instances of your components and switch these things out. And if I would need to show this in a CSS, it would look something like that, right? I really need to find where it's used, and I probably can't just find and replace because I don't want all the tinies becoming huge. But it's pretty cool already to do so, and it's mostly enough for most microsites and smaller pages. This is for one of my clients. I did like a tiny tool where he can actually edit these tokens in the browser, so it's easier to give my feedback. So, oh, can you make this space a little bigger, etc. And by using these names already, he could give me a precise feedback, and I would actually know what to do. I will share the link at the end. It's still live. You can go on the little crayon on the lower left and actually edit the site that is live. And that's also where we started at my current client, ZKB. That's a nice sounding name, like every Swiss bank, ZKB in English, where we also started with these design values and went from there and starting implementing what we call reference tokens. So basically, reference tokens is essentially a variable that points to another variable. So we disallowed by design ourselves to use value tokens at all. They're forbidden. We don't even show them in the style guide. And we forced some semantical meaning. So in this example, we say, oh, cherry red is the main brand color, and the main brand color is the button color. And just by doing that, we are having a common understanding of how these colors are used. And I know precisely that when I will change the brand color, this will impact the buttons as well. And if you design this way, it makes it super efficient to change afterwards or to modify for another brand. And in this example, and it creates, this mental model, like I said, and maybe you could visualize it in a way like that, or your mental understanding of this system would look something like that, and it's not just a flat list of colors, it's some kind of logic. And to retake this example, I would know that if I change the brand color now, probably I need to be careful about my error color, or it allows me to change my brand color without having to worry about my error color. And if we go back to this example, It takes a bit more time when coming up with these names. We had lots of iterations where we talked with the designer, but why is this space? And it could be quite tedious in the beginning, but it paid off quite quickly when we were reusing things, obviously. So we would have to think of good names for all the spaces and colors. But whenever we had design iteration, the values would actually change and not the semantics. So all we needed to edit is we have one single JSON file where all this lives in, and we don't have to touch one line of code to do these iterations. So it's quite an effective way to work. And again, if I would need to visualize that, I don't need to touch any of the variables in my components. They just stay the same, just because I pointed one variable to another. It's pretty simple, but quite effective. And since we have started, they have switched to from using Sketch to using Figma. And there is a quite cool plugin called Figma Tokens that actually allows you to manage your design system in the JSON and then use it in Figma and export it. And coincidentally, it looks almost the same than the thing we were already building up to this point. So on the left, you can see our value tokens, and on the right, you can see our actual taxonomy. So you can see there is no RGB value whatsoever on the right side. And we wouldn't even expose them in the style guide. We just had still a list of colors, but you couldn't even find the hex value because we want you to use the semantical name to think of what am I designing here or what am I implementing here? What is the meaning of that color? And this also allowed us to build a tool that visualizes all these colors. And it's interactive, so you could hover the brand color, you would see what other colors it would impact. This is on my CodePen currently, so you can use it as long as you use this convention, this naming convention. And it's so nice because now whenever we edit the brand color, for example, we know, oh, it will impact all these other colors. Or we can say, oh, we're gonna detach this from this color by purpose, so it's not bound to the brand color anymore. And in fact, we're using this already on the left. Yeah, on the left side, you can see the ZKB brand, how it looks now, and it took us a few hours to completely reskin the style for another brand that they have that is completely red, has a little tighter spaces, another typography. So it was somewhat tedious to do, but it paid off very, very quickly as soon as we needed other brands. And it also shows in the CSS stats nicely. We only have the colors that we actually have in there. I'm quite proud of that, as you can see. And we only have like these 12 unique font sizes, and the one that is weird on the top is because it's relative to the screen size. So with that, we now have token semantics. We have introduced like a way of naming things. We can redesign things a bit easier, and we have control over the complexity. And we also saw that it made it way easier to do everything else. So the taxonomy is something you need to do on top. You need to talk about what the design means with your designer, but it allows you to push these things into each other. And now we're able to start coding when we start with the visual design, because when you know that a title is a title, you know that you will have a stack on top of this or on the bottom of this title, and this will probably not change. So you can already implement things based on a concept. You don't need a finished visual design, and you can start working on it. So it has proven quite practical already. And for the client I work now, I'm trying something new that is like generative rule-based design. I call these rule tokens. Please suggest a better name. That's just what I thought of last week and was like, yeah, that sounds edgy, but it's probably just better to call them function tokens. But basically the idea is to not have a fixed pointer, but to say, hey, my on-card color, so the color that is supposed to be on the card background, is whatever has the best contrast on that background. Or you could say, oh, our highlight cards, these are like little cards that we use for the brand that are supposed to be highlighted, are the complementary color of the other cards that we have. And we can do completely generative things where I've built this tool that allows you to do a color ramp. And does it move? Oh, yeah. And it allows you to play around with a design, with a color system, basically. And so this pointer would point to this system and not to a fixed value anymore. So it allows you to be way more generative about your design. You can now play with a tool that is given or with a rule that you have set for yourself, and you don't need to bother about the implementation anymore. For sizes, something that I have used quite a lot is a Bezier curve that maybe some of you know from the animation, where we don't need a fixed size anymore, but a value token can now point to somewhere in this curve, and you can later on change that curve. In fact, I have built a little tool for ZKB where we can actually show all the sizes we are using in that matter. And I put them on this Bezier curve. You can now edit this curve and fit all these sizes to that curve and see how it affects your design. I mean, I would have to show you in Storybook how it actually affects the design, but it's quite nice to be able to do subtle changes or even big changes. You could say, oh, I need a completely different curve on mobile, and yeah, that would be all your responsive design. Right now I'm working for Aerne. That's like a brand that does solar installations and warm, I'm not sure, heat pumps, I think they're called exactly. And they're doing this dashboard for users that where I basically reverse engineered the design. And I looked at what are the design rules that I could identify there and tried to play around a bit with these. So they're like almost complementary color. So now you can like change the color. That's a use case they have because they have other clients white labeling their solution for themselves. And it will automatically know, oh, the other is always needs to be the complementary color, and you can change how complementary or not complementary at all it is. You would see the spaces even and be able to play around with that. And this served us as serves us as a base to go further from that. And I think that's quite a nice place to be in now, because I've always been very interested in generative design or generative art in general. And in fact, I have built quite a lot of tools that I built for fun, but now these two worlds come together somehow. I'm able to like connect these tools to my actual work and to gain way more freedom in and creativity in what we do. And there are lots of tools around that allow you to play with these design systems already, that when you use these rules, you can now test how it would look like on your design. And there are books from the 60s. This one from Karl Gerstner, Programme entwerfen. It's called Designing Programs in English, where he describes in great length what he did for print, and it's from the 60s. It's kind of sad that we lost this somewhere on the way, but it's kind of exciting to be here now and to be able to see, oh, we can do this again because we have all this stack of documentation in between. There's also lots of classic literature about color and lots of cool online tools that I have linked in the end as well that you should definitely play with to explore your next design. So yeah, I think we're on the top of the pyramid now. We have creative freedom again, and that's actually the end of my talk. So I want to encourage you to engineer your next design, no matter if you're a coder or designer. If you're a coder, help the designer to implement these ideas, and if you're a designer, try to explain how you came up with this design. So yeah, that was it. Thanks for having me. And the slides and all the notes are behind this QR code.
Well done. Thank you very much, David. Your color, your favorite color name, what was it again?
Testosterone.
Testosterone.
Yeah.
Oh, lovely. Alrighty. So, just a reminder for you to please go to slido.com/593-135 to ask a question or raise your hand here if you dare. In the meantime, so we have a couple of questions coming in. First question, are you using a special plugin for handling sub-brand themes in Storybook?
Yeah, I think there is one. I haven't implemented the themes myself, but I think it's called Themes, Storybook Themes. And we actually have a switch in Storybook now where you can switch between the brands and you see how it applies in the colors and the components.
So designers are not better at naming things then?
No, but we're good together.
All right, all right. Cool, so next question that we have here. Would you say that this way of generative, iterative design processes could be a next big step in the way we iterate design?
I hope it is. Or, I mean, it's way more fun to play with your design like that, and it kind of allows you to explore further. It is way harder to explore if you need to go into Sketch or Figma and manually change all these sizes and then apply it to all your components until you see a result, instead of just playing with two simple rules and see how your design changes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, anyone have a question here? Yes, I see someone. Second.
Hi.
Hi.
I have a question. If you pass so much power to the client by choosing every aspect of your design, how do you make sure the client chooses the right values?
Well, it's not the client itself, it's the designers of that client that usually do that, and I fully trust them to know their brand. And it also has the nice side effect that it documents the decisions quite nicely. So if the next designer comes, it's way easier to understand if you see one of these curves. Oh, I need to come up with a new space, a bigger space. You know, oh, I just go along this curve and choose the next one. You don't have to magically come up with one. Same with colors. If you're in a system, it's way easier to make an informed decision than just having to try understand what happened there and then do whatever.
Thank you. So, okay, we have time for one final question before we head into the break, before the last talk today. So, final question. How was your approach of engineering design received by designers?
With lots of skepticism at first, because we didn't have the design tools to implement it yet. We didn't have all this taxonomy. We didn't have all these connected tools, basically, but now that we have and that you can see, you can change this bar and it changes all the design, it's quite powerful, and I think it sells itself now.
So now they think it's a good idea?
Not all of them, but most of them, yeah.
Some people just, they just want to see the world burn. All right, okay, so unfortunately, I know there were more questions, but we won't have time to get to them. Thank you very much, David, for your talk.
Thank you for having me.